If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Sharing it with your friends and family helps spread knowledge. And when we help others grow, we grow too. Thank you so much for listening. Let's dive into the podcast. The Christmas Eve Fire and Vanishing of the 5 Children. Christmas Eve, 1945, was supposed to be perfect. The Sodder house in Fayetteville, West Virginia, glowed with warm light as 9 children played and laughed. George and Jenny Sodder watched their family celebrate, unaware that their world would shatter before dawn. Around 1 a.m, Jenny woke to the smell of smoke. She shook George awake, and they rushed through the house, gathering their youngest children. The flames spread faster than seemed possible. Marion, the eldest daughter still at home, helped her parents guide 4 children to safety outside. But 5 children remained trapped upstairs. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, ages 5 through 14, were somewhere in that burning house. George ran to get his ladder from its usual spot. It was gone. He sprinted to his trucks, desperate to drive one under the bedroom windows. Neither truck would start, though both had worked perfectly the day before. The phone lines were dead. A neighbor had to drive to the fire station. The fire department took over an hour to arrive, even though the station sat just 2 miles away. When the firefighters finally came, their equipment barely worked. The water pressure was mysteriously low. Nothing seemed to function when it mattered most. George screamed his children's names into the roaring flames. The fire consumed the house with unusual speed, collapsing the roof within 45 minutes. By morning, only ashes and twisted metal remained. The family stood in the cold December air, staring at the ruins where 5 of their children had vanished. The fire chief made a quick decision. He declared the children dead, burned completely to ash. But George knew something was wrong. He had worked with coal his entire life. He understood fire and heat. Even the hottest flames leave bones, teeth, something. The family searched through every inch of the debris. They found nothing. No trace of 5 human beings who should have left some remains. The official investigation lasted barely 4 hours. Case closed, the authorities said. Move on. But how do 5 children simply disappear? George hired a private investigator. The man found bone fragments and gave them to the Sodders, claiming they belonged to the children. The family sent the pieces to the FBI. The lab results came back months later with shocking news. The bones belonged to an adult, and they had never been burned. The Sodders never rebuilt their home. Instead, they created a memorial on the empty lot, a constant reminder of the Christmas Eve when 5 children walked upstairs and were never seen again. The memorial stood as a silent question that would haunt the family for decades. What really happened that night? Where did the children go? Some mysteries refused to stay buried, even in ashes. I explained evidence and theories of arson. Something wasn't right about that December night in 1945. The officials called it an accident, blamed old wiring for the flames that took the Sodder home. But George Sodder knew better. He had paid good money just months before to have an electrician check every wire, every connection. The man had given him a clean report. The fire department's story began to crack under closer look. Why were the water barrels frozen solid on a night when they should have helped fight the flames? George had always kept those barrels ready for emergencies. Now they sat like blocks of ice, useless when his family needed them most. The ladder told another strange tale. George kept it against the side of his house, always in the same spot. That night, when he ran outside to reach his children on the 2nd floor, the ladder was gone. Someone had moved it. Someone had thrown it far from the house, into a ditch where it couldn't help anyone. Even stranger, nothing would start. George's truck sat dead in the driveway, engines that had run fine the day before, now silent and cold. The family couldn't drive for help. They couldn't reach the upper windows. They could only watch and scream. people in town began to whisper. George Sodder had never hidden his feelings about the war. He spoke loud and clear against fascism. Proud of his Italian roots, but angry at what was happening overseas. This made him enemies. Men had visited his home before the fire, men who didn't like his opinions. One stranger had been especially direct. He pointed at George's house and said the wiring was bad, that the place would go up in flames. George had laughed it off then. Now those words felt like a threat, not a warning. The phone lines had been cut that night. Someone used wire cutters to slice through the connections before the fire started. The official report never mentioned this detail. It never explained why rescue seemed impossible from every angle. Local people started asking questions the investigators wouldn't touch. How does a house burn so hot that it leaves no trace of 5 children? How does so many rescue attempts fail at once? How does an electrical fire start in a house with perfect wiring? The answers pointed to something darker than an accident. Someone wanted the Sodder children gone. Someone wanted George Sodder silenced. The fire was just the beginning of a mystery that would haunt Fayetteville for decades. Mafia retaliation and kidnapping suspicions. George Sodder never held back his opinions. In the small town of Fayetteville, he spoke loudly against Mussolini and his fascist ways back in Italy. His neighbors knew where he stood. His friends heard his anger about what was happening to his homeland. But speaking out comes with a price. Some people didn't like what George had to say. The night of the fire, something felt wrong from the start. Mrs. Sodder noticed a strange truck parked near their house earlier that day. Men inside watched their home. They spoke in hushed voices she couldn't understand. After the flames died down, whispers began to spread through town. A local store owner claimed he saw something odd a morning after the fire. 5 children walking with 2 men near the bus station. The children looked scared. The men were speaking Italian. Another witness came forward weeks later. She had been driving through town that terrible night. Her headlights caught something that made her stomach drop. A group of people hurrying toward a dark car. Some looked like children. One man was pushing them along, speaking in a language that wasn't English. The police dismissed these reports. They said people see things when they're upset. Grief plays tricks on the mind. But the Sodders couldn't shake what they heard. George began to wonder if his loud words had painted a target on his family. Had someone decided to teach him a lesson? In the old country, families knew how these things worked. You cross the wrong people, and they find ways to hurt you where it matters most. The children's bodies were never found in the ashes. The fire burned hot, officials said. Hot enough to destroy everything. But George knew fires. He understood how things burned. Children don't just disappear without a trace. Letters started arriving months later. Anonymous notes that made George's hands shake. One said his children were safe but far away. Another warned him to stop asking questions. The handwriting looked foreign. The words felt like threats wrapped in promises. A private detective told the family something that changed everything. He had contacts who whispered about a plan. Take the children. Keep them alive. Use them to keep George quiet about things that mattered to certain people. The Sodders held on to hope like a lifeline. Their children were somewhere out there, scared but breathing, waiting for rescue that might never come. But who would believe such a wild story? Who would understand that sometimes the most impossible answer is the only one that makes sense? The search for the missing children. George and Jenny Sodder refused to believe their children were gone forever. The official story said the 5 kids died in the fire. But no bones, no teeth, no proof at all. Something deep inside told them their babies were still alive somewhere. The grieving parents made a choice that would consume the rest of their lives. They would find their children, no matter how long it took or how much it cost. George put up a massive billboard on Route 16. 5 young faces stared down at passing cars. The words offered a reward for any information. Drivers would slow down, studying those innocent eyes, wondering what really happened that terrible night. The billboard became famous throughout West Virginia. Strangers would stop by the house to share stories. Some claimed they saw children who looked just like the missing Sodders. Others whispered about strange men asking questions in nearby towns right before the fire. Letters began arriving at the Sodder home. Most came from kind people wanting to help. But some letters were different. They had no return address. The handwriting looked shaky, nervous. One envelope contained a photograph. A young man stared back at them. Could this be their son, Louis, now grown up? The picture was blurry, taken from far away. But something about the eyes looked familiar. Jenny would hold that photograph for hours, searching for any sign that this stranger was her boy. The family hired private detectives. These men promised results. They traveled to distant cities, following tips and rumors. Each investigation cost money the Sodders barely had. Each lead ended in disappointment. A hotel clerk in Florida swore he saw one of the children. A truck driver claimed he gave a ride to a scared little girl who matched the description. A woman in Georgia said she knew where the children were hidden. Every phone call brought hope. Every meeting brought heartbreak. Years passed. The billboard grew faded and weathered, but George kept replacing it. The reward money increased. The family never stopped believing. Strange things continued to happen. Anonymous calls would come in the middle of the night. The caller would breathe heavily, then hang up. Once, a man's voice whispered, "The children were safe," before the line went dead. Were these cruel jokes? Or was someone trying to send a message? The search became the family's entire world. Other children grew up and moved away. But the memory of those 5 faces never left the billboard or their hearts. Official findings and public doubt. The official report came back with cold, hard words. The children died in the fire. Case closed. A coroner's jury gathered in the small West Virginia town. They listened to testimony. They reviewed what little evidence remained from that Christmas Eve blaze. Their decision was swift and final. Death certificates were issued for all 5 missing Sodder children. But something felt wrong from the very start. No bones, no teeth, no trace of human remains in the ashes. The fire had burned hot, officials claimed. Hot enough to reduce 5 young bodies to nothing but dust scattered by the wind. George Sodder stared at the smoldering ruins of his home. He had worked in construction for years. He knew about fires. He knew about heat. This explanation made no sense to him. The fire chief stood beside the rubble, making his report. He spoke with confidence at first. Yes, he had found human remains. Small fragments of bone and organs, he said. But when pressed for details, his story began to change. Later, the same fire chief told a different tale. Maybe there were no remains after all. Maybe the heat had been too intense. His words shifted like smoke in the winter air. The FBI stepped in to help. Federal agents examined the scene. They too concluded the children had perished in the flames. Their report supported the local findings. Everything was neat and tidy on paper. Yet doubts spread through the community like wildfire. Neighbors whispered over coffee and across fence lines. How could 5 children simply vanish without a trace? How could a house fire burn so completely that nothing remained of 5 young lives? The Sodder family refused to believe the official story. Jenny Sodder, the children's mother, spent sleepless nights thinking about that terrible morning. She remembered the phone call that woke them. She remembered the strange man who had visited weeks before, making threats about their house. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Why did the phone lines cut out so conveniently? Why wouldn't the trucks start when George tried to move them closer to the house? Why did it take the fire department so long to arrive? Local newspapers began asking the same questions. Citizens formed their own theories. Some believed the children had been taken. Others suspected a cover-up. The official findings stood firm on paper. But in the hearts and minds of those who knew the family, doubt took root and grew stronger with each passing day. Legacy and continuing mystery, the years stretched on like shadows growing longer at sunset. George and Jenny Sodder grew old, but their hearts never stopped aching. Every Christmas morning felt empty. Every birthday that passed was another reminder of children who would never blow out candles again. Sylvia, the youngest daughter who survived that terrible night, made a promise. She would not let her brothers and sisters be forgotten. She carried their story like a sacred flame, sharing it with anyone who would listen. Reporters came to the house. Television crews filmed interviews. Sylvia's voice never wavered as she told the same heartbreaking tale year after year. The family put up a billboard on Route 16. It showed pictures of the 5 missing children. Bold letters asked a simple question that haunted everyone who drove past. What happened to our children? For decades, that sign stood as a monument to hope and desperation. Drivers would slow down to read it. Some would stop and stare, wondering about those young faces frozen in time. Strange letters still arrived at the Sodder home. Phone calls came in the middle of the night. People claimed they had seen one of the children in Florida, in California, in places far from West Virginia. Each lead sparked hope. Each one ended in disappointment. The family followed every whisper, chased every shadow, but the truth remained hidden. New theories emerged as the story spread. Some said the children had been kidnapped and sold. Others believed they were taken to an orphanage somewhere. A few suggested they had been hidden by people who wanted to hurt George for his strong opinions about the war. But theories are just stories we tell ourselves when facts disappear. The FBI reopened the case in the 1960s. They found nothing new. Local police had given up long ago. The fire department's records had vanished. Evidence had been lost or destroyed. It was as if someone had deliberately erased every clue. Sylvia never gave up. Even when her hair turned gray, even when her hands grew weak, she kept fighting for answers. She died in 2021, taking the family's last desperate hope with her. But she had done what she promised. The story lived on. Today, the Sodder children remain one of America's most puzzling mysteries. Their case appears in books and documentaries. Internet forums buzz with new theories. Amateur detectives study old photographs, searching for clues everyone else missed. 5 children vanished on Christmas Eve in 1945. They left behind empty beds, broken hearts, and questions that echo through the decades. Their story reminds us that some mysteries refuse to die. Some secrets stay buried forever. The truth sleeps somewhere in the darkness, waiting for someone brave enough to wake it up.